All right, so Sander, we've been talking for a couple of days about sort of everything that's going on in the world right now, um, and in this country. And we had a really good conversation the other day. We were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, both as people on social media. We use our social media, as platforms. And I know that a big part of your a big piece to your sort of platform and what you do is talking about equality and talking about being an ally and how you can show up for LGBT folks. And that's obviously how we're connected, through your beautiful sister Jazz. And we had a chance to work on a lot of things, and we've had some really good conversations about LGBT equality and being an ally. Um, but this is like one of the first times that we've ever really talked about racism, and it's the first time we ever talked about it. And so we had a really good conversation the other day. So I figured, well, I mean, you're the one that said, let's just do this on camera and like, let's talk about it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Basically, when we had that conversation the other day, I felt like you were really informing me on a lot of things. And with this Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of people are talking about everyone going out and educating themselves. And I feel like that's something I never really did, but it's something that I want to do and I know I need to do to now going forward. And you being one of my closest friends, you've been able to provide me that education. And instead of talking about it the day that we started talking about it, I was like, stop, hold that conversation. I think there's so much more I need to learn, and I want to learn it from you. And obviously, all the other things that I'm reading and seeing in the news, and just that what everyone's talking about. So I thought it would be important that we have this conversation here today and hopefully share it with other people, because I think it's important that people like me who maybe can't completely understand or have never really faced the same type of marginalization that black people and LGBTQ people face, um, show that it's important that we are able to educate ourselves and really listen so that we could help amplify your guys' voices.
You're saying that you don't understand what it's like to be a black person. I get that. So it's safe to say that we're like talking about our own experiences. Neither one of us speak for like the whole community, or, there's people of different experiences. And I think that's the very point, is that so many people have so many different perspectives and opinions on what the problem is, how to fix it, that the most important thing that we can do, I think, or one of the an important piece of what we should do is like sitting down and having conversations with people that don't have the same experiences. And so I don't know what it's like to be a white person. Um, and so I'm curious. I may have some things in mind, but I don't know. Um, I definitely know that the culture, the dominant culture, the culture that we've seen in music and television and in media and in images, when images are presented to us, for the most part, have been white folks. And to be honest, the in America, there's more white people here now than there are other folks, people of color, black folks, and so um, it's really difficult for me to know exactly what your experience is. I'm curious, like, what was your experience in connection to all this? Like, it's pretty clear right now that you're coming from a place of, I see this as an issue. You're recognizing it, and so like, what was your experience before this?
Yeah, I mean, I think my experiences before it were that I would hear these stories, similar to George Floyd over the years, Trayvon Martin and stuff like that, and because I'm white, I felt like they didn't really affect me, or I didn't feel the need to associate with them, and I think that's a major part of the problem. Basically, I would hear these stories and I'd recognize that it wasn't right and what was going on was not right, but I thought, being a white person, that like it really wasn't my place to speak up about it, and I didn't know how to speak up about it. I didn't want to make a post or share my opinion and then in fear of being like told that you're not speaking about it correctly, I just kind of kept my mouth shut, and I feel like a lot of people kept their mouth shut for the longest time. But this George Floyd murder and these protests and everything that's going on has kind of changed that light, and it looks like a lot of people, uh, white men and women, and just anyone who maybe in the past might have been like me and said, I can't associate with this because I'm not black and I can't relate. Now I feel like people are actually coming out and actually talking about it, and I think that's super important because we need to raise our visibility to help amplify voices of the black community. And I think that's what this movement is, and that's what's so important about it.
Did you think that, like, I think one of the most popular cases, one of the cases that people have heard about is, and remember a lot of the details, is the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case.
Yeah.
And that obviously happened in Florida. And that was, you know, that was not a situation of someone who was an active police officer, but this it plays out in almost the same way. And so, like, did you ever put yourself in those shoes and like think, okay, like, have you ever walked to get food or Skittles late at night? I don't know what time it was, but it was obviously at night, with a hoodie on, and think that like, after Trayvon Martin, what did you think about? Because I don't know how old Trayvon would have been, but you are obviously would have been around the same age. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah. I mean, I've never had to fear for walking out of my house or walking anywhere. As a matter of fact, it's the privilege that I have, and it's these privileges that makes it even more important for me to help amplify Black people's voices and recognize that there's a problem here.
there's a problem. A, do they recognize that is actually a problem? And B, do we all think that it's the same issue? Because I think that there's a lot of people who think, not only do they think, I'm white, it's not my place to speak up about this. I think that's today. But yesterday, I think they were thinking, well, he shouldn't have been walking there. That's what I think. So let's be real. Like, what did you think when you hear about these black guys getting shot? Where the first thing that I think people's minds go to is, what did they do? What did they do to get shot? You know? And so I'm asking, like, is that kind of, do you think that that's where people's minds were? I'm not asking you to speak for everyone. I'm saying for yourself, like, do you remember what you were thinking back then, like with Trayvon Martin, like, were you thinking, oh, he must have been a troublemaker? Or were you thinking, well, he shouldn't have dressed like that? What were you thinking about why he got shot? Or were you thinking George Zimmerman is a horrible animal, or George Zimmerman is racist? Like, what were you thinking about? I know that you're not black and you can't understand that, but you must have thought something about, why did this happen? How did this happen? Whose fault is it? Like, so I'm just curious, like, what your mindset was.
Yeah, that's actually a place where I could say my mindset hasn't really changed. I think back then when that happened, I knew something was wrong, and I was infuriated about the way the George Zimmerman and everything that went down with that. I remember being infuriated. The difference now, that I think I've finally come to realize, is the importance of actually speaking up and being an active ally to support the black community. And I think it's the same lesson that I learned in terms of LGBTQ allyship. I think there's a difference between being an ally versus allyship. There's a difference between not being racist and being anti-racist. And that's the most important lesson that I think people really need to take out of this. It's like, you have these opinions, what are you going to do about it? And I'm honestly saying, like, I never took action. I just kind of let the thoughts go past my head. And that's the problem. That's a part of the problem. It's not the problem, but it's a part of the problem. And if more people who have the privileges like me are open to amplifying your guys' voices and starting to talk about it, that's what's creating the conversation, and that's what will create the change. And we're starting to see it. But what will happen 2 weeks from now when there's no more protest? You know?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, it begs. I mean, this certainly feels like a major moment in our, at least in our lifetime, and I'm hopeful that there will be change. But before we jump over all that, like, let's get into the nitty gritty. Um, you know, I like. I'm really, really interested in getting perspective from you on what goes through your mind. I mean, I know that you are an ally, and I'm not trying to get you to say something shady, but if you know that your experiences aren't the same, then our thoughts, then I'm curious, like, if you can help translate what you think other people, other white people are thinking, if you can help me understand. And I don't know if you think that you're connected to how other white people who are not aware think, but I mean, you have a very specific point of view because you have a trans sister, and so now you're connected to the LGBTQIA plus community. But before that, did you know how people were thinking? And I know that you've been the target of um, hate and bullying in the past, probably ever since Jazz was out on TV, I would imagine. But with regards to race, do you think that have you ever been in a locker room, or I don't know, locker room, but like in a room where you've heard where there weren't any black people and you've heard something like, whoa, that's not good. Have you ever been in that situation? I'm just curious because when I go into a room, then they stop talking about that. And so my assumption is, like, for instance, if I was going to go with you to meet every friend that you have in college, because you're in college right now, then my assumption would be you guys we're all like in the same mindset. Sander wants to be an ally and be helpful and learn, and all of his friends do too, and everyone that you know. And so if that's not true, why do you think that's not true? What have you heard? I'm not asking for names. I'm asking, like, what experiences have you had to let you know that people are in your community, in your neighborhood, in your state are not yet caught up? Because if everybody's like, we all know that we need to help for Black Lives Matter, then there's no work to be done. But I know that as a black woman, I have to get up and I have to march and I have to talk and speak out of my voice and I have to use the platform, whatever I have. Hopefully people will help to create space for other black people to speak out on this, or LGBT people or marginalized people. That's what should always happen, but it doesn't always happen. And so in addition to that, the work to change isn't like just for black people. Like, black people cannot solve racism, you know? And so I'm curious to know, like, what is it? Have you heard anything that, like, what are your friends, what would other people think about this conversation that we're having? What is in their mind? I'm just curious because when you see somebody like Trayvon Martin or George Floyd or, you know, Philando Castile, or there's a whole list of names, and those are just names we know. I'm curious really, what is the thinking other than, well, here's the thing. First of all, let's take it piece by piece. I didn't mean to ask you a question and then change the subject. If you have a very, like, direct answer to that, then great. But that might be too hard of a question to answer because I know you don't know what they're thinking. But
The thing I could probably say, the most direct experience I've had with any type of racism is the use of the N word within immediate circles. I immediately have always felt uncomfortable when my white friends are using the N word, and I have stood up to people and said, "Please don't use that word around me." Like, it's something that I think is very offensive.
okay,
And
but wait, let's pause. So they're comfortable using that word, and so, like, what has the what did they what did they say when you said don't use that word around me? I mean, it's more than just don't use that word.
yeah, it's not like they were saying it in a derogatory term towards the black community. It's more like they're using it freely, like it's not a big deal to use that word. And I'm just like, no, that's not a word that you could just use to call people. That's offensive to black people. But obviously, still, I need education on that as well. Like, but that's just a small
Okay.
instance. But I think the other main problem is that people associate themselves with people that they look at and they're like, I can relate to them. And so if you asked if I had been having this conversation in the past about this with you and I had posted something about it, a lot of probably my closest friends and uh, just like people in my media community, like circle, would probably say, Sandra, you're dipping your toes into something that does not relate to you, and they would take it as me doing something offensive to them for associating like that. That's honestly how I think people would respond. Um, and I'm hoping that's not the case anymore because of this Black Lives Matter movement, and that people could realize that it's important that we're having these types of conversation. A white guy, black woman, and
Let's just talk about this because this is one of the things that's really interesting. When I see the protests, I see people who are in pain. I see people, a reaction to, it's almost like twisting. Okay, it's like this. If you take a rubber band and you twist it and 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 twist it, it snaps. What I'm seeing is the twisting and the twisting and the twisting. I see the protests as the rubber band being twisted and twisted and twisted and twisted, and to the point where it's going to snap. I think a lot of white people see just the snap, and they don't understand that there's a whole bunch of stuff that got this started. And so when we talk about the protests, and you know, I think they just see a bunch of angry black people looting and stealing. That's what, and I think that makes it easy for them, because then the whole problem is, see those black people? All they do is steal and loot and shoot up things. That's all they do. So have you ever heard that idea?
I have not heard that idea, but I've definitely seen people making posts who are basically saying that, yes, they support Black Lives Matter, but then they'll add in the next step of, but these protests and this violence and brutality that's going on in the streets is wrong. And I think the problem that you just mentioned about that has a lot to do with the way the media portrays things. As a person who is studying media with my master's degree, I learned all about the different way that media portrays things. And I think that the media outlets understand that people want to see something that's newsworthy. And they think that the newsworthy thing is that there's brutality and riots and stuff. But they're not showing enough of the peaceful protest and more of the messaging and what really needs to be shared.
I think people see the looting or the protest as a bunch of black people just being ruckus and looting and going crazy, and they're not really focused on, they're not really acknowledging that it's literally a reaction to everything that's happened, you know? And so to me, I think it's important that we keep the focus. The problem is the fact that there have been so many of these videos. It's not, I don't even know I don't know, I would like to think, but if we didn't have video cameras, would we still be as outraged? I don't know. Because there certainly are people people of color and black folks. There's there's a black trans man that was murdered last week in Florida who died at the hands of the police, who had committed some crimes. I think it has nothing, he's innocent until proven guilty, just like the guy that shot up that movie theater in 2012, just like Dylan Roof, who went in and shot up a church. They took him to Burger King on the way home. He didn't get murdered by the cops, and they know he did it. He said, I did it. He had the gun in his hand and said, I don't regret it. Even after they caught him, he said, I don't regret it. And so if we can allow him to see the judge, then why can't this black trans man who he may have killed somebody and he needs to face justice for that. But what ends up happening is,
and that has to do with the system.
That is exactly that is the system.
It's the way people perceive it. It's people are like, oh my God, it's a white person walking towards me. Chill. If it's a black person and they look, they're 6'2" and they have big muscles or something, then people are automatically intimidated. And it's a big part of the problem.
Or they're a teenager with Skittles.
Yeah, exactly. And because of the way that society works, people are more scared. It's the same way people treat the LGBTQ plus community. Like, it's ridiculous, and it needs to change. But
it's not the same way.
Well, it's not the same, but I'm saying like people fear. It's the fear that people have. It's that fear that it has been placed on it by society and the way community talks about things and the way just the way that people see things. It's that there's a fear that's been created, and it's a fear that needs to be taken away, and that people need to recognize doesn't need to exist anymore.
I guess the difference is that there is more things in place. It just doesn't end up coming out the same way in terms of the police violence, but you're definitely right. Well, people judging.
You did say because I said LGBTQ relates to it. Could you explain to me how it doesn't relate? I obviously understand it to a certain extent, but I think the explanation's warranted. Like, I think it would be.
Yeah. So here we go. As someone who is who is LGBTQIA+ and part of the queer community, and I'm also a heterosexual woman, and I'm a Black woman, right?
Yep.
Since I have a very here's what I think. LGBTQ people obviously are victims of violence and crime and discrimination. Discrimination is one step. A step past that is the crime that exists and the violent crimes or the violence and the murder that happens to people. And so people in the LGBT community are obviously targets for that. But I haven't been able. Okay, so first of all, when we talk about LGBTQ experiences versus Black experience, it automatically says Black people are not LGBTQ.
Got it.
It automatically says LGBTQ people is not Black related. That's a problem. To me, LGBTQ is Black. I'm Black, and I'm in the LGBTQ community. So those two things for me are not as easily separated. You separate those two, you're literally ripping me in half. And so I can't be LGBTQ and not be Black, and I can't be Black and not LGBTQ. It's not possible.
Got it.
And so that's the first thing. The second thing is the discrimination that I have experienced, and so I guess related to that is the LGBTQ discrimination that I've experienced and seen always connects to is always affected. It's either turned up or turned down, or it's always affected by someone's socioeconomic status, someone's race and ethnicity, and someone's gender. Anti-gay sentiments are different for men than they are for women. Anti-gay sentiments are different for Black men than they are for Black women. Anti-gay sentiments are different. They're just different for all these different groups of people. And so these things are all a factor. It's almost impossible. Like if you're talking about, a crime being committed against someone, a lot of times who they are and what they look like is related to that if it's a crime of someone that's a stranger. If it's someone that they know, and most crime is committed they say that most crime is committed by people that we already have a relationship with, right? An ex-lover, a friend, or some, horrible friend. So then the people who are being murdered by strangers, that's where the discrimination comes in. I'm judging you based on what I think I know about you, but I don't really know you. So I'm using what you look like, what I think your religion is, the fact that you walk a certain way and I think you're gay or whatever. That's what happens when people discriminate against people they don't know. And so how you look is a factor. Your race, it comes into play. And so I think the experience for some LGBT people who are white. Okay, here's the thing. Some gay guys are able to or choose to hide the fact that they are gay. So then automatically that helps them. It's a survival tactic, I think. It allows them to escape discrimination and homophobia. And if they're white, then they're not getting beat up because they're black. So if they're white, then their chances are, if they're able to successfully hide from everyone or certain people that they are gay, then they may have maybe they're thinking they have better chances of not being discriminated against.
Yeah, gotcha. But what you're saying is,
for
black people, it's like they're black.
White women cannot hide the fact that they are women.
Yeah.
White gay women cannot hide the fact that they are women, but they can hide the fact that they are gay if they wanted to.
Yeah.
To avoid discrimination. But the fact that they are white saves them, although the fact that they are women puts them in lower than men. And so they will still have discrimination based on gender, but not necessarily based on their sexuality.
Got it.
Black gay women might be able to hide the fact that they are gay, but they will never be able to hide the fact that they are black. And as we've seen in many situations, that always counts. Whether you are a working professional, whether you are walking on the street, you can be walking on the street, minding your own business, and be murdered. Breonna Taylor, in her house, she is a first responder, helping people with helping take care of people with coronavirus. In her house, watching TV, and murdered.
It's terrible.
So, if that had happened to a white woman, something tells me that the reaction would be a lot different, you know?
Yep.
And so that's it's really difficult to compare LGBT versus black. Like I said, I don't like to do that.
But it opened my eyes, and I understand a little bit more now. Obviously, anyone who's LGBTQ and is very open about it, like, they're always going to face discrimination. That's similar, but a lot of LGBTQ people are able to and choose to just kind of tell their closest allies and friends, but like walking on the street, no one's going to really say anything or fuss. But a black person, you can't just be like, I'm not black, and walk around, and people always will still do it. And because of the systematic racism that exists in society, there's always that chance that something could go wrong because of the color of your skin. Right?
Exactly.
And that makes sense.
That's 100%. So with looting versus rage, I want people to know that it is a desperate cry. First of all, black people can be angry in the streets and screaming and hollering without looting. Someone looting is, I believe, a different situation. Now, being angry enough to burning something is not looting. You know what I mean? I know that people think it's all mixed up in the same thing. There's people who loot, and maybe that's what's obviously in their minds. But like, we have to take this situation here. COVID-19 in our country has affected black people disproportionately, people of color and black people disproportionately. And on top of that, we've all been stuck in a quarantine. We damn well know it, because there's a whole bunch of people in Michigan who took their guns to the governor and basically tried to intimidate into opening up the state. And they were angry, they were screaming and hollering. And so they are in pain and they want to be heard. Well, imagine that, and being shot, seeing a new video where another person is shot and killed in the news every day from your community that you feel connected to. And so
at the Michigan stuff, no one was injured, harmed, shot, and they were being praised as good people by some, like, that's what
by the president.
By the president.
By the president, honey.
And I think
the president.
And then he
called
black people looters and stuff. That's just not right.
He calls black people looters, and he calls them thugs. He calls the people protesting thugs in that protest, but in Charlottesville, they're very fine people. In Michigan, he's on their side and says, and he's proud of them. I don't remember exactly what he said about Michigan, but he never said they're thugs.
But they had guns in their hands, right?
They had guns in their hands.
That's crazy.
And so, okay.
But it's an example. I think it's a major example.
It's so much bigger than that. And so the systematic, and there's a difference between systemic and systematic. That's what people should know. Systemic just means it's a result of a function. Like if I turn on the vacuum and it every time it sucks the things up into it, that's systemic. Like it's just the result of a system of things working. Systematic is an entire structure that's built to go in one direction with a purpose, right? And so when we talk about a protester, we can see how their life is affected by COVID-19 and the quarantine, being out of work. We can also go back and see their living conditions and what's the situation there. What's their family unit like? Who are they living with? What connects to that is what opportunities have they had with housing and jobs to have a bunker or a place where they can store 10 years worth of food? Or do they need to go out and work because they don't have any of those things? And then how they, where they live has a lot to do with, like, if they were able to rent, if someone was willing to rent to them based on how they look, Yep. That changes people's situations. And so that's a very small piece. That's just about housing. That's a very small piece. I hear some people say, just vote, darling, vote, and it'll be fine. We can't just vote our way out of police brutality. And voting is very important. I vote. I encourage people to vote. I encourage people to be registered to vote. I encourage people to know exactly who is running for state and local offices in their legislature. Because a lot of times the laws in this country, the laws that matter are usually they're created by the people in the local legislature, the legislature in your state. The president's tweeting stuff, but that doesn't become law. That's him just communicating. And so I think that's really important. However, if you live in a state and there are some states, and for the longest time in this country, the practice was after black folks were able to legally vote in the 60s, just 50-something years ago. Well, I won't say exactly how many years ago. Years ago, in the 60s, after they were given the ability to vote, then the direct response to that is, let's make it illegal for them to vote for another reason. So they were basically going in and arresting black people left and right. Any single excuse, get them in jail, get a record on. And so people with felonies or previous arrest, had previously been arrested or incarcerated, were no longer eligible to vote. They can't vote. You're not qualified. You're not, eligible for voting.
Yeah,
a lot of that has changed.
Statistics about that. Like, I've seen statistics because I've been trying to do research and inform myself. I think it was two quotes that both relate to like 1/3, and it's that 1/3 of black people have been arrested for something, and also that 1/3 of black people aren't able to vote. So maybe it's correlated, I guess, based off what you just said.
Oh, there's definitely a correlation between the black folks that can't vote. There's a connection between the black folks that do not vote and the black people who are not legally allowed to vote. And that is connected to.
What's the reason that so many black people have been arrested though? Like I don't get it. Like that obviously shows a big problem. Like that's not
right. So I think a lot of white people, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I think what the president wants you to think, and what Ronald Reagan wanted you to think, and what a lot of people wanted you to think, is that black people just commit crimes, and so they just do more crimes, and that's why they're in jail. But that's not true. There's more white people in jail, so there's more white people committing crimes than there are black people. Period. And black people committing crimes, I'm not an expert on, crime statistics and incarceration. But I do know that the number of black folks in jail, I believe, has more to do. We can't look at the number of black people in jail and ask why are there so many black people in jail without honestly looking at and acknowledging the fact that a black person and a white person committing the same crime get two different sentences. A white person robbing a store gets less time. I think it's about 14 to 20% less time, less harsh of a punishment than a black person committing the same crime. I don't care if it's stealing some gum from the store or murdering someone. Proportionately, their crime, the punishment and the sentencing and the treatment is much less and much lighter for any white person than it is for a black person. That doesn't mean that some white people haven't gone to jail and haven't been, convicted of crimes. That doesn't mean that. That means, on average, if you take black people and ask why they're in jail for 10 years, many of those are for things like, if it's maybe it's say stealing a car. Of the black people in jail for stealing a car, they're in there for longer, and there's more of them in there. Now let's look at the white people who stole a car. They're all free. Not all free, but they don't have the same punishment. And so that's a big part of the reason why there are black folks who are incarcerated and who have stayed incarcerated. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, before they even get to the jail, if they get to the jail, if they're not shot on the street, it's the interactions with the police. Black people are more likely to be arrested than white people for doing the same crime. There are definitely white people who steal cigarettes, use counterfeit bills, right? Or buy Skittles. And every single one of those situations, the black people in those three situations are dead.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
And so,
in some cases.
Yeah, and it's not every case, but these are the cases that we're seeing. And so some people might say it's an exception.
I'm going to chime in for a second. You also mentioned something about how they get longer sentences based off the interactions with the police. The police, I feel like, are obviously more scared in these situations and taking more brutality, and then the people are like the black people are responding because of the way they're being touched or something, and then they're getting punished for it, but the police isn't.
Exactly. Well, in Florida, in the state where you live, it is any police officer involved in, I believe, a shooting where the person dies, they are automatically viewed as a victim, which means that the record is sealed and that we don't know who that police officer is. And so that automatically is, the system in Florida is built to protect the officers at all costs and which emboldens the officers, and it allows them, at some point, the officers know that I can go and shoot these people. If they're black, I can shoot them and I won't get in trouble.
And
you know what I mean?
And when it's that opportunity, and it's not right.
I have not seen white people being shot and beaten the way that black people have by the police. I haven't seen it. Have you?
I have not. In very, maybe rare cases. But I also think it's important to recognize. So, I do think that there's a lot of racism, especially just in general, there's a lot of racism, and a lot of cops have used racism and racists then that's why these murders are happening. But a lot of people are also kind of combating that with not all cops are bad cops, which I agree with. Not all cops are bad cops. The problem is there's too much wiggle room for cops to be able to do the actions that they've done. And it's not that the racism starts and ends with a police officer who's evil.
It's not. And we can't look at it like the reason why black people get arrested because that individual cop is just a bad cop. It's the system. It's like saying, drugs and alcohol, like we're finally at a position where we can acknowledge that drugs and alcohol play a part in how people behave. And when people are behaving badly, then sometimes drugs and alcohol are as a factor. It doesn't mean that every human who uses drugs or alcohol is evil. It just means that they are under the influence. Cops are victims of racism as well. I don't just mean, of course, there's cops of color, police officers of color who have been victimized by racism, but cops, the human beings who are police officers, are now a part of a system that is built to incarcerate black people by the masses. That's just the way it is. It's this. It's the idea of policing. The idea of having. I'm sorry. I know I'm yelling because I'm passionate about this. But the idea of policing, of going out and finding criminals, is to protect the property and the lives of people who they don't think are the criminals. And the people who have the most property, just going historically, are white people. And so this is kind of goes, there's a historic correlation here. When the slaves were freed, there was a bunch of people who were like, we're not having this. We're not happy about this. So what they did was they said, we have to have people on patrol to keep those black folks in order. Those freed slaves, we now have to police them. If they do anything wrong, put them in jail. Put them back in handcuffs. We have to figure out a way to get these newly freed slaves back in handcuffs. And so it was the modern policing, modern day police department, the way that it's structured with the sergeant and the detectives and the people on this patrol, that whole structure. It's a very similar model in every state. That is a direct response to the freed slaves. And so the system is racist and set up to incarcerate black people. And we see it time and time again. One of my earliest interactions with the cops is I was 12 years old and I was a young child out dancing with some friends in the parking lot. I was in a racist town. I didn't live there, but I was there for a play. And so we're harmless, we're actors, we're artists, and we're 12. Somebody's like 15 or 16 because they're driving. And so it's me and a group of other girls, and we're just dancing in the parking lot. We're not being rambunctious. We're literally like our car's in the parking lot of the pizza joint, and it's a small town. It's really not a crowded parking lot. And we're just like dancing around the car. We're not like running around the car, but the music's on, and we're just, dancing and having a good time outside the car, like while the radio's playing. And we were getting ready to leave, but we're just like, enjoying before we sit in the car. And so the cops pull up and get out, and I'm 12 years old and threaten me and say, what are you doing here? You're so lucky that it's daytime and it's not night. Which obviously made me scared. And then ever since then, I never felt safe around the police because I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Nothing that I was doing was dangerous to anyone. It wasn't inappropriate. If I needed help, I would never run to that police officer.
Yeah.
And there we have it. And automatically I'm the problem, and the police officer didn't say anything to the white girls that I was dancing with. Came right up to me and basically said, if this were nighttime, you'd be dead.
That's terrible.
That's typical.
That's typical. And
that's I don't know who that
typical is even more terrible. And I think a lot of people that aren't black like me don't think that, well, we don't hear those stories enough. It's not being talked about enough. And finally, hopefully it is, but in the past it wasn't being talked about enough, and we wouldn't believe it if we did hear it. And that's a part of the problem. And that's where people like me need to recognize that this is happening and this is a problem. We need to fix this problem, and we need to help you guys fix this problem. Because we're all in this together. We're all human.
No, y'all have to fix the problem. Because what we're doing is trying to be what I'm doing is trying to be an upstanding, productive member of society. And I turn a blind eye to a lot of stuff. And I know that's what Gandhi would have preached. But it's human to react. When a police officer comes up to you and hits you with a thing, it's human to react. If you're scared for your life, like if that police officer had pulled his gun and said, if that police officer that I had the interaction with had said, you're lucky that it's not nighttime because you'd be dead. And then he said, you know what, matter of fact, and pulled out his gun and he said, freeze, I might have just run for my life.
What else
and
would you do?
I certainly don't want to get in the car with him and go to another location. And so I can understand why by people who are not police officers, like I think that police officers should be trained. There's a lot of things I think about the police officers, but I think part of the problem is that the police officers have not been trained. If you see a person out in the street naked and screaming and they're black, do you shoot them or do you get them help? Right? And I think even if they're running at you and like, ugh, do you just shoot them? Or if they're a black man, it seems like the answer is shoot them. But if they're a white man, it seems like the answer is, oh, get him help he's crazy. Let's get him to the doctor. And that is the issue. And the black people who have been shot it seems as though they didn't have the opportunity or the chance to plead their case in front of a judge. And so I think that's part of the problem. And so the other part of the problem is the stereotypes. And so that's one of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about is stereotypes, because the problem is this. I think one of the things that's an issue is the stereotypes that sort of have been sold about the different groups of people, about gay people, about white people, about trans people, about black people, about Indian people and Asian people. Every group has their stereotypes. And, there are some things you can always find an exception to the rule. You can always find someone who fits that stereotype. And unfortunately for black folks, that ends up being the end of the story. Here we go. Here's the stereotype. I had always heard as a young kid, I had always heard people talking about Irish people and potatoes and how Irish people just eat a bunch of potatoes. And that stereotype is based in the potato famine, right? Happened. It probably also sort of exacerbated by what was going on during the Depression. Potatoes are cheap and they're food. And so everyone eats them. But for some reason, Irish folks have been connected to potatoes. And I know that's a silly example, but I'm trying to show that everyone can be connected to stereotypes. But for black people, the stereotypes are deadly. The stereotypes are cause for them to be killed. And so I think that's part of the problem. And so yeah, it's just really, really frustrating. And I hope that we can get people working against all of this to be anti-racist, anti-homophobic, instead of just being, I'm okay with gay people or I'm okay with black people. It can't be that anymore. You can't be a non-racist, and you can't be, you can be, but, being non-race, our country has been in a state is actively racist, but many of our allies have been like, okay, I don't consider myself racist, and as long as I feel good about not being racist, then everything's fine.
Well, you're having this conversation with me, and I could promise you it's going to be reported to my entire household. And they'll see it. But, I'm going to make sure to be having these conversations, and I hope that me having these conversations encourages other people who may not be black to also be having these conversations. and realize that it's okay to have these conversations, and it's essential to have these conversations.
Yeah, I think if I left anyone with anything, because it's a long conversation we had, is that Black folks have a few tools to help dismantle racism. But white people have the keys to dismantling and stopping the racism that does exist in white areas. White people have access to stopping that. Black people can protest in the streets, and some white people will listen, but the rest of the racism that exists, and I'm not saying racism is just only, there are different types of discrimination, and that's a whole nother conversation. But the racism that does exist in this country, that is directed. Whatever racism that comes from white people, only white people can fix that. That's what I'm trying to say. Whatever racism comes from white people, only people who can fix that are white people. That's it. That's it.
Yep.
And so we're working together, and I'm really happy that you decided to have this conversation with me. I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation, and we should have more of these conversations. Well, that's our call. Thanks for chatting, boo.
Of course.
All right. I will talk to you later.